Soon I will be done. The troubles of this world, troubles, so many troubles of this world. Soon I will be done. The troubles of
Almost 5 years after Gill's murder, Deidre Gaddy was arrested. She confessed to Gill's murder and says that Anthony Thrash was with her. In December 1984, Tony was arrested and charged with capital murder. At Tony's trial, Gaddy was the state's star witness. The Arkansas Supreme Court, on Tony's direct appeal, said that the evidence independent of Gaddy's testimony would not be sufficient to convict Thrash of capital felony murder. Tony's entire case boiled down to whether the jury believed Gaddy and her account of what took place on the night that Gill lost his life. To gain an understanding of Tony's case, I ask that you compare Gaddy's trial testimony with statements given to police by others who were with Gill or saw him on the night that he was killed. According to Gaddy, on the evening of June 6, 1980, she and Tony, with Tony dressed as a female, walked from Tony's house to a shopping center located on Highway 65 south of Dumas. Around 9 or 10 o'clock, they stood on the parking lot between Piggly Wiggly and Magic Mart. Within 15 to 20 minutes, Tommy Gill came by in a black pickup truck. Gill offered them a ride. Gaddy told them that they were going to Pine Bluff and to hop in. The prosecutor asked Gaddy,
"Then where did you go? Did you take any roundabout way?"
No. We drove straight on out from Piggly Wiggly, straight out to the highway, and made a left onto the highway.
Gaddy's time frame is very important, telling the jury that Gill picked them up no later than 10:30 p.m. According to Gaddy, somewhere between Grady and Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Tony nudged her, saying that he had to use the bathroom, and Gill pulled over to the side of the road. It was here on this roadside that Gaddy says Tony shot Gill twice at close range with a shotgun. In continuing her trial testimony, Gaddy said,
"We put Gill's body into the bed of Gill's truck. Tony drove back down Highway 65 to a farmhouse area southwest of Dumas. Tony drove to Hadley Hill, Lover's Lane. I'm sure he didn't go through town. He went through a farm area to get out there. We parked the truck in front of the house. I believe in front of this old building, dilapidated, where we parked the truck. Tony went around to the back of the truck and took Bruce out of the truck. I don't remember exactly seeing where he put the body. I knew he put it under that house, but I don't know where under the house."
When the prosecutor asked Gaddy how long was he gone, Gaddy answered,
"Oh, I'd say 10 to 20 minutes, no longer than 10 to 15 minutes. Tony came back, got in the truck, and pulled off. We went and parked the truck at a place we call the Projects."
When the time is calculated that it would take to go to the places that Gaddy said to have done the things that Gaddy said were done, it would have taken at least 2.5 hours. It would be around 1 a.m. leaving the old dilapidated house. So compare Gaddy's testimony to these statements. Gill's brother-in-law.
"Tom and I were real close. I saw Tom on the Friday night that he disappeared. I was at his house at 6:30 p.m. I came over there and he was walking around just wearing his pants, cleaning the house. He was drinking a beer. At about 6:30, 7:30, I took a bath while he was cleaning up. When I got out, he asked me to go to the steakhouse with him. I told him I couldn't get in."
Gill's wife.
On Friday, June 6, 1980, I went to work at 6:30 p.m. I called Tom's father to see if they had returned. Tom's father said that Tom had gone to DeWitt, Arkansas, with his brother Bobby Gill. I kept calling home and finally got Tom at 8:30 p.m. Tom told me that he had been in the shower and heard the phone ringing. My girlfriend brought me home from work around midnight. John, my son, my sister Becca, and Becca's boyfriend Kirby McElroy were there at my house. I asked if Tom was home. Kirby said that he had talked to Tom around 9:30 or 10 at the steakhouse parking lot.
Gill's sister-in-law.
On Friday, June 6, 1980, I and Kelly Smallwood had gone to my brother-in-law, Tommy Gill's house, between 8:30 and 9 p.m. Tommy was on the phone talking to his wife, Nancy. Kelly Smallwood and I then left in Kelly's car and rode around town looking for Kirby McElroy. We found Kirby later, sitting with Tommy Gill in McElroy's truck in front of the Western Railway Steakhouse. Gill's truck was parked beside McElroy's. We pulled up on Kirby's side and spoke to them. Kirby and I left together between 9:30 and 10 p.m.
owner and manager of the Western Railway Steakhouse Club.
I owned and managed the Western Railway Steakhouse Club, Brookhaven Shopping Center in Dumas, Arkansas. I worked the front door the night of Friday, June 6, 1980. Tommy Gill came in early. We opened at 9 p.m., and he came in around 9:05 p.m. Tommy Gill is a member of the club. I do not require members to sign in. Under the old system, members did sign in. A lot of them still do, and they forget. Tommy ordered a beer. He sat down by himself because there wasn't anyone else except employees in the club. Tommy came back to the bar in 10 minutes, and I served him a Coors beer. The night got busy, especially around 11 p.m. The big crowd came. I got extremely busy and didn't notice him much after that.
Bobby Sue Spainhour, Gill's friend.
On Friday, June 6, 1980, I was in the car with Jerry Robertson. At approximately 9:30 p.m., we had driven through the Brookhaven Shopping Center. We were traveling slow and passed in front of the buildings housing the Magic Mart, Piggly Wiggly, and Gino's Pizza Parlor. I saw Tommy Gill come out of Gino's. He crossed in front of the movie house and got into his pickup truck. Gill pulled his truck up to the corner of the Railway Steakhouse. Two persons dressed as black females approached Gill's truck on the driver's side, talking for not more than 5 seconds. The two black females walked to the rear of Gill's truck to the passenger side, and both got into the truck with Gill. I saw Gill's truck turn onto U.S. Highway 65 and drive south.
Kirby, who dates Gill's sister-in-law, Becca.
On Friday, June 6, 1980, I drove up to the parking lot near the Railway Steakhouse. I parked beside Tom Gill. Tom got into the truck with me. Tom said that he was going in the steakhouse. We sat in the truck for about 20 minutes. During the time that we were in the truck, Becca and Kelly Smallwood pulled up asking me why I was late for our date.
Club member David French.
I was in the Western Railway Steakhouse when Tommy Gill came in at about 9:15 or 9:30 p.m. I called to Gill and asked him to sit at the table with Larry Miller and me. After a while, Paul Wilson came and sat down with us. I left the steakhouse between 10 or 10:15 p.m. Gill was still there when I left.
Larry Miller, club member.
David French was the only one at the table that I knew. I was introduced to Tommy Gill by himself as he sat at the table with us. Between 9 to 10 p.m., there were 3 at my table. He made 4. He had a drink when he sat down. David French had to leave around 10, and all of a sudden, Tommy Gill was gone.
Club member Paul Wilson.
I went to the Western Railway Steakhouse on Friday, June 6, 1980, between 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock p.m. I stayed there until about 12 or 12:30 a.m. I sat down at the table with Benji Rena, David French, James Broswell and his wife, and Larry Miller. The other person at the table I knew as the person who worked at Kendrick's welding shop was Tommy Gill. Tommy Gill was talking to Larry Miller and David French.
Club member Joanne Cantrell.
About 9:30 or 10 p.m., myself and Marilyn Fortenberry went to the Western Railway. I saw Tom sitting with David French, Paul Wilson, and Larry Miller. While I was standing there, Tom got up and started talking to a white male, and Tom waved at me.
Sean Akins, club member.
We got to the Western Railway about 10 minutes after 9 p.m. Tommy was sitting at a table with 3 unknown guys. About an hour after we were there, he had left. We didn't see him leave, but the table he was sitting at was cleared.
Roger Williams, club employee.
I reported to work at the Western Railway on Friday, June 6, 1980. I never get to work before 10 p.m. On this particular Friday, I got to work between 10 and 10:30 p.m. When I entered the club, I saw Tommy Gill talking to Steve Martin, the club's manager.
Gill's friend, Margaret Rogers.
I was in Gino's Pizza on Friday, June 6, 1980. I knew Tommy personally. I grew up with his wife's family. I was at the table with Sherry Housley, who works at Gino's, and my big sister, Betty Cantrell, came in around 10 minutes after 10 p.m. Around 10:30 p.m., Tom came to the door but didn't come in. I told my sister, "There is Tom." He talked to somebody, I don't know who.
Betty Cantrell, Gill's friend.
I saw Tom Gill come inside Gino's Pizza and talk to some white person and then left. I left Gino's Pizza right after 10:30 p.m. I babysat until 9:30 p.m. Then I came to Gino's. Tom came in after 10 p.m. after the movie show let out.
Gill's friend John Struthers.
I saw Tom Gill on Friday, June 6, 1980. I'd been at the Dumas Theater with my wife, Carol Struthers. When we left the theater between 10 and 10:30 p.m., we walked down the sidewalk and went into Gino's Pizza Parlor. While there, we sat at a table next to Margaret Rogers. Margaret Rogers stated to me, "There's Tom." I looked toward the door and saw Tom standing in the open door. Tom was talking to someone, but I don't remember who it was.
Carol Struthers.
I had gone to the movie with my husband, John, on Friday, June 6, 1980. After the movie had let out, between 10 and 10:30 p.m., we had gone to Gino's Pizza Parlor. While there, I had heard Margaret Rogers say, "Well, there's Tom." I had my back to the door, and I did not turn around and look, so I did not see Tom.
Danny Wells, Gill's friend.
I did see Tom on Friday night, June 6, 1980, at approximately 10 p.m., coming out of Gino's Pizza. Tom was alone and appeared to be looking for someone on the parking lot. I did observe two black females at the corner by the Western Railway Lounge in Piggly Wiggly, but it may have been on a previous trip between 7:30 and 8, because I had seen these two people earlier in front of the Old Church of Christ.
Gill's friend, Deborah Williams.
I went to the Western Railway Steakhouse with Michael Smith on Friday, June 6, 1980, arriving between 9:30 and 10 p.m. We sat at the bar until Nancy and Lana Patton came in, and then we got a table together. A little later, Roy Patton and his wife joined us. I saw Tom Gill come in the front door alone between 10 o'clock and 10:30 p.m.
Lana Patton, Gill's friend.
I have known Tommy Gill all my life. I had gone to the Western Railway Steakhouse on Friday, June 6, 1980 with my sister. While we were at the steakhouse, we sat at a table with my brother, Roy Patton, and his wife, Sherry, Debbie Williams, Michael Smith, Brenda McBroom, and others. I had been at the steakhouse approximately 30 minutes when I saw Tommy Gill come into the front door. Tommy was alone when he came in the door.
Gill's friend, Nancy Patton.
On Friday, June 6, 1980, I had gone to the Western Railway Steakhouse with my sister Lana. Shortly after our arrival, my brother Roy Patton and his wife Sherry came in. We sat at the same table with my brother and his wife, Debbie Williams and Michael Smith. Between 11 and 12 p.m., I saw Tommy Gill walk across the dance floor and come to our table. When Tommy got to the table, he spoke to everyone present and appeared to bend and say something to Roy.
Club member George Wright.
I remember seeing Tom when he came through the bar early in the night. Around 11:30 p.m., I believe there was a couple of people with him that had beards. I remember Gill scratching his name out on the club's sign-in sheet, saying that he was a member of the club. The club closed about 4:30 or 5 a.m.
Jerry Smith, Gill's friend.
On Friday night, during the carnival, I went to the Western Railway Steakhouse in Dumas, Arkansas. I arrived somewhere around 12 midnight because I left the Pendleton Market and went to the club. While I was standing at the cash register inside the club, Tommy came by. I know Tommy, so I turned and spoke to him. There were two persons that appeared to be with him. I asked Tommy, "Who are your buddies?" Tommy said that he didn't know who they were, that they were with the carnival.
Out of these 22 statements given to police after Gill's disappearance, the state called only 4 of the 22 people to testify at Tony's trial. These 22 statements draw a picture of Tommy Gill's whereabouts on Friday, June 6, 1980, between the hours of 6:30 and 12 o'clock midnight. Around 6:30 p.m., Gill's brother-in-law came by his house and took a bath while Gill cleaned around the house. Gill asked his brother-in-law if he would go to the club with him, but Thomas said that he probably couldn't get in. Gill's wife, Nancy, called and talked to him around 8:30 p.m. Becca, Gill's sister-in-law, heard the call while they were looking for her boyfriend, Kirby. Shortly after 9 p.m., Gill entered the Western Railway Steakhouse Club by himself. When Gill came into the club, he ordered a beer. In about 10 minutes, Gill came back to the bar and Martin served him another beer. Gill left the steakhouse and walked over to Gino's Pizza Parlor about 9:30 p.m. Bobby Sue Spainauer saw Gill come out of Gino's and get into his pickup truck, Gill pulling his truck up to the corner of the steakhouse club. 2 persons dressed as black females got into Gill's truck, and Gill drove out on Highway 65 and went south. 10 or 15 minutes later, Gill returned to the steakhouse parking lot alone. Gill was getting out of his truck when Kirby McElroy drove up and parked beside him. Gill got into Kirby's truck while they sat and talked for about 20 minutes. During this time, Becca and Kelly pulled up and spoke to them also. Becca and Kirby got into a car with some other friends while Gill returned to the steakhouse club. When Gill entered the club, David called to Gill and asked him to sit at the table with he and Larry Miller. Shortly after Gill sat down, Paul Wilson came and joined them. A few minutes after 10, David had to leave the club, and right after this, Gill left the table also. Between 10:10 and 10:30 p.m., a number of people saw Gill come to the door of Gino's Pizza, but did not come in. Gill talked with somebody for a moment while standing at the door and then left. Danny Wells stated that he saw Gill coming from Gino's Pizza at this time, and once again, Gill returned to the steakhouse club. When Tommy Gill left Gino's at this later time, he came into the front door of the club where both Deborah Williams and Lana Patton saw Gill when he entered the club. Nancy Patton had come to the steakhouse with her sister Lana, and between the hours of 11 and 12 o'clock midnight, Nancy saw Gill walk across the dance floor where he came to their table and spoke to everyone present. George Wright saw Gill walk through the bar around 11:30 p.m. George believes there were a couple of guys with Gill that had beards, and George saw Gill scratch his name off of the club sign-in sheet at the bar. Take a look at this copy of the steakhouse sign-in sheet dated June 6, 1980. According to Stephen Martin, the club's owner, Gill came into the club at 9:05 p.m. Tom signed the sign-in sheet, forgetting that it was no longer required for members. Notice the second name on the sheet that is scratched out. You can tell that the last name is Gill. This confirms George Wright's memory of seeing Gill scratch his name off of the sheet. Tommy Gill came to the steakhouse at 9:05 p.m. Lana and Nancy came to the club together, and the sisters both signed in after Gill. Yet Lana saw Gill come in the front door at 10:30 p.m. This sign-in sheet confirms that Tommy Gill left and came back to the steakhouse on a number of occasions. Marlon Touchstone is another person that said they saw Tom Gill leave the club with two guys. Marlon came and signed into the club much later that night, placing him with others who saw Gill between 11 and 12 o'clock midnight with these two guys. Marlon Touchstone's late night signature is on the steakhouse sign-in sheet. Jerry Smith arrived at the steakhouse around 12 a.m. He was standing by the cash register when Gill came by. Jerry couldn't remember if Gill was coming into the steakhouse or leaving it. Just like George and Marlon, Jerry saw two guys at this time that appeared to be with Gill. Jerry Smith was the last known witness to have seen Tommy Gill alive that night. These witness statements severely contradict Gaddy's account of what took place that night. The prosecutor Sam Pope had each and every one of these statements in his possession. We do not know whether Don Glover, Tony's lawyer, had possession of these same statements, but it is without a doubt that if he did, then he certainly failed to make use of them to dispel Gaddy's bizarre story. Decades later, Tony learned about these statements given to police officers by people who were with Gill or saw him on the night that he became missing. Tony's only defense was that of discrediting Gaddy as a witness, because Tony knew that he was playing cards at the neighbor's home on the night of June 6, 1980. The mere fact that only 4 of these 22 statements were heard by the jury clearly shows that truth is not what the prosecutor sought, just the testimony that could be twisted and formed into making Gaddy's story believable. When you take Gaddy's testimony away, the prosecutor's whole case against Tony falls apart. Out of the 22 statements, here are the 4 people that the state called: Nancy Gill Williams, Danny Wells, Bobby Sue Spainhour, and Kirby McElroy. At trial, Nancy gave the date and time she last spoke to her husband. This matched her 1980 statement to police. Nancy's testimony did not connect Tony to Gill's death in any way. The prosecutor simply used Nancy's pain and loss to gain the jury's sympathy and an emotional edge against Tony. Kirby gave the date and time that he talked to Gill parked at the Brookhaven Shopping Center. This matched his 1980 statement to police. Kirby's testimony did not connect Tony to Gill's death. The prosecutor used Kirby to establish Gill's presence at the Brookhaven Shopping Center on this particular night. At trial, Bobby Sue's memory and details were not as clear as it was in her 1980 statement. There were facts stated by Bobby Sue in 1980 that were not brought out during her trial testimony. Nor did Bobby's testimony connect Tony to Gill's death. The prosecutor's only concern was to have Bobby Sue tell the jury that she saw 2 black people that appeared to be females get into Gill's truck, yet Bobby Sue was unable to identify Tony as being one of these people. Danny Wells' trial testimony was drastically different from his statement given in 1980. Out of these 4 witnesses, Wells' trial testimony was the most damaging toward Tony. Wells picked Tony out as being one of 2 people that he now says he saw dressed as a female. At the same time, no, this did not connect Tony to Gill's death. The state shrewdly manipulated evidence to make it match Gaddy's story. Tony's lawyer repeatedly fumbled the ball, Attorney Glover doing very little to set the record straight. In 1980, Danny Wells was questioned about the 2 people he saw. Danny described person number 1 as a black female, dark complexion, chocolate brown afro hair, 18 to 20 years old, 5'5" or 5 feet 4 inches tall, wearing a knee-length dress. Danny said that person number 2 was a black female, description unknown, black curly wig, 18 to 20 years old, 6 feet tall, wearing a knee-length dress, carrying a purse, appeared to be a male in female clothing. Wells said in 1980 that person number 2 was a black female, description unknown, yet 5 years later at trial, Wells says this person is Tony. In 1980, Wells said he saw Gill coming out of Gino's Pizza at around 10 p.m. At trial in 1985, Wells said that he saw Gill in Gino's parking lot at about an hour before dark. The National Weather Service reports June 6, 1980 sunset at 8:20 p.m. This is a 3-hour difference between Wells' 1980 account and his 1985 trial testimony. Why didn't Tony's lawyer point out to the jury Danny Wells' sudden ability to identify Tony when Wells had said description unknown 5 years earlier? Why wasn't Thomas Austin called to tell the jury that he was at Gill's house between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m., taking a bath while Gill cleaned around the house? Why wasn't Becca Austin called to tell the jury that she was at Gill's house around 8:30 p.m. while Gill was talking on the telephone with his wife Nancy? Both of these witnesses should have been heard by the jury to question Wells' accuracy and reliability as a state's witness. The jury heard Bobby Sue say, "I cannot identify these two people. I saw two black people that appear to be females get into Gill's truck. Wells did not see Gill with anyone, yet told the jury that he saw Tony dressed as a female. The state used their testimony to make it appear to be the same two people, to have the jury believe that Bobby Sue saw Tony get into Gill's truck. The state used only partial evidence, plus Tony's lawyer did not set the record straight, either because he did not have the 1980 police reports or was ineffective. Sam Pope just had to make the jury accept Gaddy's story. Have you noticed that Gaddy and Bobby Sue gave different directions as to which way Gill drove when he left the parking lot? Gaddy told the jury that Gill drove out of the parking lot with her and Tony and made a left onto Highway 65 toward Pine Bluff. Bobby Sue's 1980 police report said that Gill drove out of the parking lot with two females and made a right onto Highway 65 driving south. In Bobby Sue's 1980 description of the two people she saw, the taller person was 5 feet 5 inches tall, wearing a maroon matching skirt and blouse. Hair was below the shoulder. In Danny Wells' trial description of the two people he saw, the taller person was 6 feet tall, wearing a full-length dress, and hair was above the shoulder. They had on hats. No, the jury did not get to hear these two very different descriptions, nor was it emphasized to the jury that Tony is only 5 feet 7 inches tall. No, the prosecutor did not let the jury hear Bobby Sue's 1980 statement of seeing two black females get into Gill's truck and head south on Highway 65, because Pope needed the jury to think that the two people Bobby Sue saw were Tony and Gaddy that headed north with Gill. And no, the prosecutor did not let the jury hear Bobby Sue's 1980 description of the two black females she saw get into Gill's truck, because Pope needed the jury to think that the two people Bobby Sue saw were the same two people that Wells described seeing. There are more 1980 police statements that decades later Tony became aware of, statements that were never heard by the jury. Mary Yvonne Stevens had told investigators that on Friday, June 6, 1980, the day Gill was reported missing,
my boyfriend, James Kellums, and I were parking near the house where the body was later discovered. James and I were parked about 20 feet from the house. We had gone parking right after the carnival around 12:30 a.m. When James and I first arrived at the house, there was a white two-door fancy car near the house. The two-door fancy car drove away from the house at a high rate of speed. After the white car left, James and I got out of the car and sat on the hood. I heard a scratching noise coming from the abandoned house. The scratching noise came from around the abandoned house. It sounded like someone was digging. The noise lasted about 30 minutes. The scratching noise stopped when the white car came back and stayed for a short time. The car drove very slowly past James and me, then left. The scratching noise started back up, lasting 5 more minutes. Then the scratching noise stopped for good. James and I stayed parked at this house until about 5 a.m.
James Kellums also told police,
I waited for Mary to get off work at the carnival around midnight. We went to a store, then back to the carnival. We got to the house around 12:30 a.m. We met a white car coming from the house as we were going to the house. While we were parked by the house, the car came back and parked down the road. Mary said she heard something. I didn't. I was pretty drunk. Then the car left.
Why weren't these two people called to testify at Tony's trial? They would have countered Gaddy's story that between the hours of 1 and 2 a.m., Tony drove Gill's truck to an old dilapidated house and put Gill's body under it. The statements given by Mary and James, like the many other statements that we have now seen, completely destroys any truth to Gaddy's story. Gaddy's story does not match the 1980 statements from people who were with Gill or saw him on the night he became missing. At least 6 people saw Gill after the time Gaddy said Gill gave her and Tony a ride. It is impossible that Tony and Gaddy rode with Gill almost 48 miles, then drive Gill's truck to this old house after midnight without Mary and James seeing it. The 1980 statements found decades later show the very real possibility that Gill left the steakhouse with 2 guys. He went with them to this old house, and it was here that he lost his life. Also, decades later, it was learned from Nancy Gill's 1980 police report that the Jenkins place, which is what they called this abandoned house, is owned by Nancy's uncle, Bain Poole. Her husband Tom would go to the Jenkins place almost every day to sit on the porch, drink beer, and frog gig. Gill was usually accompanied by Nancy's brother, Thomas Austin. In Thomas Austin's 1980 statement, he said that Gill would go to the Jenkins place to dump trash on Fridays. Gill's mother-in-law, Betty Jo, had also told police that Gill's habit on Friday night was to take the garbage from his house and take it out to the Poole farm, the Jenkins place. What are the chances of this actually happening? You get picked up by a complete stranger, you ride over 24 miles out of town, you shoot them, you turn around and bring the body back over 24 miles to hide it at a place where he normally comes every Friday. Not to say that it cannot happen. The question is, what is the chance of this happening?